Well, I can't see anybody that's 20.
Good morning.
Morning.
It's 9 o'clock. Hey, I say this a lot, but so many mornings I feel like I'm interrupting fellowship, but it's time to get started. So let's begin with the prayer. Please bow with me. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this beautiful morning. It's time we have together as fellow believers, times that we can gather to worship together, to study in your word together, to pray. Pray that in this next period of time that our hearts are open, our minds are open, that we learn from your word, that we learn things that we can apply in our lives, that we might be better servants of you and gain greater understanding of your will for us and for mankind. Thank you for your Son. We all sin. We fall short. We thank you for the perfect sacrifice that he made that gives us, despite our imperfections, the hope and promise of eternal life with you. We pray this in his holy name. Amen. All right, we are in Acts 23. And just a quick update of where we're at. Paul returned to Jerusalem, and as advertised, it led to, unfairly, but it did lead to problems and a riot, and he ended up basically in the middle of a riot and was protected by the Roman soldiers who showed up and restored order, or attempted to restore order. They took him into custody. He spoke to the crowd. He asked to speak to the crowd. They listened to him as he spoke to them, talked about his background, his biography, the fact that he's one of them. He grew up there. The fact that he's a Pharisee, and they were listening to him up until he said that he was, and they listened through him discussing his conversion, that Jesus was in fact the Messiah, and they were still, their ears were open to that. And then when he said that God instructed him to take the word to the Gentiles, at that point the crowd became agitated again, and he had to be, and the Romans took him in. The tribune, they took him back to the barracks and secured him, and the tribune was, kind of their normal process in this case. This guy was the center of trouble. They're not sure really what's going on, so we'll torture him and get him to describe, and then we'll get to the bottom of this. And then at that time, as he was bound, Paul said, "Is this how you treat a citizen?" And at that time, and that is not how you treat a citizen. That there's due process for a citizen, and that he was not given. So, but nevertheless, he was kept. He was kept in the barracks, basically imprisoned. And part of the reason was, if we're honest, the part of the reason was the tribune wanted to maintain order. The part of the reason was for Paul's protection. So the next day, the tribune genuinely wants to understand what's happening here. What's to understand why such the violent reaction to this man and some of the things he said. And so he calls the Jewish leaders together and says, "Hey, listen, I want to figure out what's going on here." Essentially, Paul, we've got the Sadducees and Pharisees are part of this leadership, part of the Sanhedrin, and they both have their problems with Paul, but for somewhat different reasons. And Paul, recognizing the division between the two of them, those two groups, starts talking about that he is that, part of what he's doing is looking forward to his everlasting life, with God, and the Pharisees were against, believe in life, in their spiritual existence post death, and the Sadducees do not. And I remember, I didn't say this last week. I remember learning when, trying to remember which group believes what. The group that does not believe in the prospect of eternal life are sad. You see, I'm sure most of you have heard that before. So now that he threw that out there, so the Pharisees were now sympathetic to him. The Sadducees were even more infuriated. So there's basically another ruckus that comes out of that. And then they start going after him again. So once again, the tribune has the soldiers bring him back to the barracks to secure him. So that is essentially where we ended last week. So we've had in 2 days, 2 violent riots, and one of them basically included the leadership of the I would they would consider themselves religious leaders, but they were really more than that. They were civil administrative leaders of Jerusalem, and the Romans basically just came in as to restore order, to make sure there was order. So these leaders, we've had two days in a row with violent riots, and I think the tribune probably is still a bit confused. He understands there's differences. He understands there's questions between the two groups, and with what Paul's standing for, probably is still a bit mystified that it's elevated to this level of violence. So that's where we are. So now he's back essentially in prison, secured in the barracks. And at the very end of that passage, we'll start in verse 11. So it's Acts 23. We're starting in verse 11. That the following night, the Lord stood by him and said, "Take courage, for you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." So what is that? Encouragement for Paul. I mean, there's 2 days in a row where he's basically been probably saved by Roman soldiers, but from death, almost certain death. God is basically saying, you can take this, you can spin this in a positive way, you can spin it in a negative way. But he certainly is pointing out that he is going to live in Jerusalem, and he is not on the verge of dying, because he's going to be, he will have the opportunity to testify in Rome. Jim?
What God is telling him is that God is in control. Everything that's happening to you, including the arguments between the Jewish leaders, the threats of death, is for my purposes. God's purpose. There's a plan, and I'm in charge. Right. That's a reassurance to Paul, and should be to all of us. No matter what is happening, God is in charge.
Yes. That's absolutely right. So let's move on to verse 12, Acts 23. When it was day, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 who made this conspiracy. That they went to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food till we have killed Paul. Now therefore you, along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case more exactly, and we are ready to kill him before he comes near." So it's pretty straightforward. There's a group of at least 40 that say that they are committed to killing Paul. So they go to the leaders to say, here's what you do. I mean, we basically do it again what we did yesterday. Say, hey, we need to probably make it sound conciliatory, but say, hey, we still want to examine this man. We still want to talk this out. Bring him back out, and let's talk through this again. And then they would attack while en route. Continuing, verse 16. Now the son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush, and so he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the tribune and said, "Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring you this young man to you, as he has something to say to you." Tribune took him by the hand and going aside and asked him privately, What is it that you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire somewhat more closely about him. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, who have bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are waiting, ready for your consent." So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, "Tell no one that you have informed me of these things." So Paul has family in town. And probably if you've got 40 people involved in a plot and they're going to leaders, then it's safe to say that kind of word seeping out that this is going on. And Paul's nephew is one who finds out. So he goes to Paul in the barracks. We're going to see this again. Paul does not have freedom of movement. Paul does not have the ability to leave, to walk freely. His ministry up until this point, he's been able to go, move freely about. He's gotten in prison for a day or so, but that is over. He is essentially in prison in the barracks. And we're going to see this as we go forward. The nature of his imprisonment is probably a little different than we think of. I mean, his person is secured, but he is not locked down in the sense that people can't see him. And we'll see that as we go forward. But if someone wants to see Paul, they can go see Paul. And his nephew goes to see Paul and tells him that he's heard of this threat. And considering everything else that's gone on the last couple of days, the threat is completely plausible. That we already know there's people that have been on violence against Paul. So Paul says, calls the centurion and says, "Hey, take this man to the tribune and let him hear what he has to say." So he takes him to the tribune. What does the tribune say when Paul's nephew is brought to him? What does he do? He says, "Leave us alone," which suggests that he is taking this very seriously. He's not asking for him to talk publicly. He's not asking, he's not skeptical of him. What are you saying? He's saying, it says took him by the hand and says, let's go talk privately. So he knows there's a lot going on. He knows that it's a hot environment. And so and I think that he has a sense of, and we see this, he has a sense of sympathy. I don't know if sympathy is the right word, but he does, if Paul's sending him someone, he believes there's valid reason that Paul's sending this man to speak to him. So he tells him the story of what he's heard, of the plot, and he says, "Go. Now you go, and you don't tell anybody anything about this. Don't tell anybody that you've talked to me. Don't tell me about the plot. You just go and basically mind your own business." So does he believe this? Does he believe this? What's his response? So continuing in verse 23. Then he called 2 of the centurions and said, "Get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea in the 3rd hour of the night, and also provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix the governor." And he wrote a letter to this effect: "Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency the Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them when I came upon them with the soldiers who rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen. And desiring to know the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving of death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against this man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him." So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. And on to the next day, they returned him to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. When they came to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor. They presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he was from, and when he learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. And he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. All right, so and forgive me for sounding a little cynical about some of the things I'm about to say, but I think there's a fair amount going on here that we can, you can say, even if they're doing the right thing, their motives may not be the perfect motives. So, okay, so there's this plot, and basically the plot is that they're going to invite Paul to have more further discussions, and then along the way, they're going to ambush the group and they're going to kill Paul. These at least 40 men have sworn to this. So, and it is clear that the tribune takes this threat very seriously. He does not, based on the actions that he takes, he is not doubting that this is a serious threat and a legitimate threat. However, there's more than one ways he could approach this. And one way he could have approached it is just to say, okay, I'm just going to keep Paul locked down in here, and I'm not going to take the bait, and they're going to invite him, and I'm going to say, no, we're done talking. We've talked the last couple days, and it's turned into violence, so we're not talking right now. That's not what he does. So he instead rounds up some soldiers and says, we're gonna send him to Caesarea. Now, one positive spin on this is that he knows that as long as Paul's there, it's just going to be an irritant, and it's just there's going to be no end of this as long as Paul's there. The more cynical part of me says that this is an opportunity for him to get rid of this, shift this problem into someone else's lap. And so he moves him to he gets basically in the middle of the night and gets them moving out to Caesarea. So there is the governor's there, a higher authority, and he sends Paul to him with a.
The way I look at it is the commander here has a Roman citizen under his control. And he is charged with keeping that guy alive. If anything would happen to Paul under his command, it would be bad for him. Sure. So with the turmoil going on, the problem's there. He's like you said, he's probably aware that, hey, we need to take him somewhere.
The right move is yeah.
And it's protecting my job.
That's right. That's right.
And like I said, his motives may not be pure, even though he's really doing it's the right move. As long as Paul's there will be no end of threats and plots and unrest.
I think there's a cool thing.
You see Paul here, he knows God's told him, you're going to make it to Rome.
Right.
But he also involves himself in the process. He gets information and he shares that information. It'd be easy sometimes, we ask God for guidance, we pray to him, but then there comes moments when, okay, well, how am I going to participate in that prayer? How am I going to participate in that promise?
And Paul participated.
So he does. He goes,
He didn't just say
this explanation.
Yeah.
He's going to be a part of this.
Right.
Now, I think Paul, because he'll share later in 2 Corinthians 11, and maybe we're going to go there later. I don't want to go there too much, but that's where he shares all of the various things that happen to him, all of which he uses as, listen, I've been through, but God is all through the whatever, however close I've gotten to death. I did not.
Right.
You're right. God gave him that word, but as opportunity presents itself, he took advantage of a situation where to divide the Jews the day before, and then he gets some information, and he sees that the tribune gets the information, so he is not passively just saying, I have no role in this at all. He's acting. So what's interesting is the letter from Claudius, mispronounced his name, Lysias, to Felix, to the governor. Is there anything in the letter that is false? Not really. Is he leaving out? Is he leaving out some things that are less than positive as far as his participation in this? He's not telling the whole story.
Claudius likes this.
Oh, he's a politician, probably.
His letter says, you're right. He is politics.
He's interested in himself looking good, and he's interested in keeping the peace, and he's also sees an opportunity to shift this problem to someone else. But what he says is, I'll read through this again. Just this, this is what is written to Felix. This man was seized by the Jews, true, and was about to be killed by them when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him. True. That's true, right? Having learned that he was a Roman citizen. So it's true, but the whole timeline is a little bit off. Go.
Conveniently leaving out the fact that they were about to punish him to.
That's right. So
What
actually,
happened was
there was, as we talked a minute ago, there was a riot, and
they did, go in and they did save Paul. That's true. But they didn't know he was a Roman citizen when they saved him. And then when as they were trying to sort it out, they were about to beat him in violating his rights as a citizen. And at that point, he found out that he was a citizen. So the way this is, there's a lot of spin on this message here. And then he also goes on to say, and desiring to know the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. True. I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving of death or imprisonment, which is, we'll accept that that's his sincere belief. And the fact that he was sympathetic to someone sent by Paul to him, that he was, that also kind of confirms this. And when it was disclosed to me there was a plot, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you that they have against him. So he's basically saying, there's another plot, and so I'm just sending him to you, and I'm going to tell the people here that have their disputes with him to bring it to you. But as far as I'm concerned, this is an internal, this is a citizen who deserves certain rights and privileges, and the objections that they have with him are internal religious matters. He's not in no way in violation of Roman law, so he just thinks it's basically a religious dispute. So yeah, this message is a lot of spin on it. Does he accomplish God's will? Absolutely. Are his motives pure? Absolutely not. But we get the message here that as he found out, he didn't handle everything right, but as he found out that he was generally sympathetic to Paul, generally understands that Paul is not some sort of civil insurrectionist who's really has some sinister agenda, but this is a difference of religious opinions between different groups, and they object to Paul. So moving along, in chapter 23, verse 31. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris, and the next day they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. When they had come to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he was from. And when he learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. And he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. So I don't know the ins and outs of the Roman legal system, but depending on where Paul was really from, he may or may not fall under Felix's jurisdiction. And I would be willing to bet that Felix was hoping that he would say somewhere that was outside his jurisdiction and he could pass this problem along to someone else. But he finds out that he is from somewhere that's within his jurisdiction. And so he is basically says, okay, well, you sit tight here and we're going to wait for your accusers to arrive, and then we will go from there. So chapter 24. After 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and a spokesman, one Tertullus. They laid before the governor the case against Paul, and when he had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, since through you we enjoy much peace, and since by your foresight, most excellent Felix, reforms are being made for this nation in every way and everywhere, we accept this with all gratitude. But to detain you no further, I beg you in your kindness to hear us briefly, for we have found this man a plague, one who stirs up riots among all the Jews throughout the world and is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He has even tried to profane the temple, but we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to find out from him everything which we accuse him. The Jews also joined in the charge, affirming all these things were so. So what are they saying about Paul? What is their before the Roman authority? What are they saying? What are they accusing him of?
When you talk about being the Roman tribune said, these guys.
That's a charitable way of it, yes.
Yeah, they're spending it their way, accusing him of blasphemy, that
specifically
violent.
Specifically what they're saying.
Okay, because remember, they start with all this flowery language about how much they respect the Roman authority and how wonderful a leader he is. But really, they know that the Roman, Felix doesn't care about theological disputes between Jews. He doesn't care. I mean, that's not his. He's not interested in adjudicating religious matters. So they're not accusing him necessarily of being they're on a religious level. They are saying wherever he goes, there's riots. Wherever this guy goes, there's riots. That he stirs things up. He is a troublemaker wherever. And now you've got Felix's attention, because as we've discussed, whatever the religious issues, if there's a riot, there's a problem. And they're saying wherever he goes, there's problems.
And also, they're taking into consideration, the history of Jewish revolts. So it's not just that he goes everywhere and there's riots. It's he's a Jew and he goes everywhere and have riots, and that's obviously the problem.
And we've seen that as in the first two missionary journeys, that we see that the Jews riot, the Jews will get riot, and there's different reactions to it. And we've seen in some communities the reaction to it is basically to pacify the Jews. Is basically, okay, we'll kill them or run them out of town, we'll get rid of them, and we need to settle these people down. And then in some places, the reaction to the Jews was, and especially in towns where there was not as many Jews, the reaction was, we're tired of these people, and we're gonna basically set it up to where you're getting beaten, and there's a riot against the Jews, and we saw that in Corinth. So, but the point, but that all exactly is what your point is that the Jews have a reputation of being being isolated, culturally, religiously from the communities, of being harder to get along with, and quick to riot. And that's even stronger in Jerusalem, as a difficult place to govern. We saw the same dynamic with Pontius Pilate and Jesus. I mean, Pontius basically found no wrong. He didn't see that Jesus was worthy of being crucified. He didn't see, he didn't get it. And the reason he allowed it to happen, the reason he ordered it to happen, was purely out of politics, purely out of pacifying the crowd. And he even washed his hands, saying, "This is your doing. I'm not doing this." So now the Jews are here saying, well, part of the problem that the Jews are rioting everywhere is this guy. This guy's the problem. And so they're not really talking about the fact that he, any nuance of differences of opinions from a religious standpoint, except that he is so offensive and toxic to wherever he goes that he stirs up problems, or the net result is he stirs up problems. So they spoke, and starting in verse 10, it was Paul's opportunity to respond. Knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. You can verify that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem, and they did not find me disputing with anyone or stirring up a crowd, either in the temple or in the synagogues or in the city. Neither can they prove to you what they bring up against me. But this I can confess to you, that according to the way which they call it a sect, I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law and written in the prophets, having a hope in God, which these men themselves accept, that there will be resurrection of both the just and the unjust. So I always take pains to have a clear conscience before both God and man. Now, after several years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to present offerings. While I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple without any crowd or tumult. But some Jews from Asia, they ought to be here before you and to make an accusation should they have anything against me. Or let these men themselves say what wrongdoing they found when I stood before the council. Other than this one thing, that I cried out while I was standing among them, it is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you this day. So what's Paul's response in a nutshell?
I didn't do anything wrong. Where are my accusers?
You're just saying that, I'm sure of all these troubles. Prove it. You're just making base accusations without any support.
And so they're saying there's people that were Jews from Asia that had these things to say about me. Where are they? You're just coming here and just making accusations without any sort of support or evidence. That's Paul's response. Continuing chapter in verse 22. But Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way, put them off. Well, let's stop there. What does this tell you?
Christianity.
He's aware of Christianity. So, we're probably looking at this kind of
Plunging into some speculation. But if he has heard about the way, what do we think his perspective on it is different than if he had not heard about the way? That's not a very well put question.
The way that, no pun intended, the way that Christians were marginalized in the first century is significant. It's when they were called Christians first in Antioch, it wasn't a conquest.
right.
And so, like I said, it is speculation. If he knows about the way, then maybe he's got an idea that these people are not necessarily looked at greatly. Or, he's like, okay, this is a different type of group than the Jews. If he's the leader of that group, then maybe he's not the rightest guy to say this.
I would like to think, and to your point, I would like to think that if he understands, has an idea of what the way is, and he's had some contact with Christians, with people in the Christian community, and what we know about how they conducted themselves, then he would think that these charges against Paul as a believer in the way, as a Christian, and the things that he's doing he would be more inclined to view those charges with suspicion than them if it was some group that he was unfamiliar with, and they're just saying, hey, these are a bunch of religious nuts out here that are, that we've got to, we're not, they're kind of an offshoot, and we have different opinions, and they're wrong, and they're trouble. And if you have no knowledge of them, then you might be susceptible to that argument and be more concerned about, oh, well, this group is a problem. But the way what I'm reading here is that because of his contact with them and because of his awareness of them and how they were, then he's less inclined to believe that these people are the people that are the seed of all this violence and all this chaos.
I don't think Felix, I see him as a sympathizer. He knows, but we don't know everything, but just the way he reacts, he's a sympathizer.
Yes.
He is. We're about to find out he's not a perfect. But he is sympathetic. I think that there is. We know that Judea and this area had a reputation of being a very difficult place to be a Roman, to be a Roman commander, a tribune, a governor, and we're seeing why as this thing plays out. But yes, he is certainly sympathetic to. It certainly implies that he is sympathetic to the way the Christians, and is certainly very skeptical, to say the least, of all the charges that were levied against Paul. So here we'll finish out the chapter here, starting verse 24. After some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, and he sent for Paul, and he heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. And as he reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment, Felix was alarmed and said, "Go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you." So we're getting, his wife was Jewish. The fact that his wife was Jewish probably suggested that he had a lot more understanding of a lot of the nuances of what was going on among the different groups. We see, before we go any further, we see there appears to be he has genuine interest and open-mindedness about learning about Paul's beliefs, about Jesus, up until a point. What is the point that when does he start becoming concerned and losing interest? Righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment. When Paul, that became a topic of conversation, Felix was alarmed and said, "Go away for the present, and when I get an opportunity, I will summon you." So it all suggests that he was sympathetic, he was open, but when he had an understanding, as he got a fuller understanding of what was involved with going on the way, that he lost interest, and that he was not interested in changing his life, in converting in any way. He was not, his interest was purely academic, let's put it that way. So now here we are, Paul's there in Caesarea, and Felix, what does Felix do? What are his options? You're Felix, what are your options? Because we've fairly well established at this point that there is that he doesn't believe, and the Tribune in Jerusalem didn't believe that Paul was in any way in violation of Roman law, was not in violation of anything that deserving punishment by Roman punishment. They also know if they release him, then who knows what problems will emerge. So what's the easy way out? Okay, so we'll continue on with 26. At the same time, he hoped that money would be given to him by Paul, so he sent for him often and conversed with him. So he continued to talk to him, even though what we get here is that nothing points to him, any genuine conversion here. And his motivation for talking to Paul was not openness to Christianity. When 2 years had elapsed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and desiring to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. So we know, you know that the Roman rulers, kind of like American political leaders, you have a term of office, and you're not assigned somewhere indefinitely. There's set time limits. So basically, he got to the point where, and I'm not saying this completely to condemn him, but to just kind of put yourself in his shoes, is his options are, he's not going to prosecute him because there's nothing he can do to prosecute him. Just to leave him in prison and just leave be, or to let him go, and who knows what's going to happen. And we're going to have another insurrection to deal with, and who's going to look bad when that happens. So there's a third way, and that way, if Paul can round up some money, and probably part of the arrangement would be that Paul would go in opposite direction than Jerusalem and leave, but doesn't say that Paul's going to do that. So basically, Felix just runs out the clock and just says, "Thanks, I'll keep the Jews pacified. Not going to prosecute him, but we're just going to keep Paul locked down. But we're going to, but I'm not going to let him go."
From these chapters that we looked at, what's interesting about Paul's journey is that Paul was so convicted by what he believed, he wasn't afraid to be the least popular guy. Mm-hmm. Whether he was with the Pharisees, Sadducees, Romans, even when he talks about here. And I'm sure Felix sent him a message like that. If you can write some money, we'll let you get out of here. Right. And I think that's an important message for us today in a world that requires us, just as people, to tolerate everything. That we have to be so convicted by what we believe that we're okay with not being the most popular person in the room. And what I like about what Paul did here with Felix, it says that when he talked about judgment and righteousness, he reasoned with him. He knew that his wife was a Jew. He didn't look at Felix like, your wife didn't read the Torah and tell you about it, so I got to explain this to you. And so that is the brilliance of Paul, is his ability to think about it, but his conviction to not just tolerate everything for his own benefit. And that's a lesson for every Christian for every period of time, because the pressure here is to say, write a letter to all the churches, run up some money so I can get out of prison. Mm-hmm. If I get out of prison, I can serve you. Right. But it doesn't say that Paul tried to escape for 2 years. Mm-hmm. Now why? That's the question. Well, because of who he was and what he
his conviction.
He'd already been told,
right,
you're going to go to Rome.
Right.
Right.
So, can you kind of summarize what he said here?
What he said is,
And it's a great point. And as we go through Acts, we see this again and again. That is something just really, really powerful about Paul. Paul is not afraid to be contrary. He's not afraid to be unpopular. He's not afraid to have the only opinion in a room. He's not swayed by the crowds. And we see it again and again as he goes through his ministry. He's gonna speak in front of people. He knows that are going to be hostile to him. He will call people out as they're doing wrong. And that is in our today's society, and correct me if I'm, is all the pressure on us, and this is part of our society, and we're living in this, is to kind of get along and go along, and not to push back, and not to speak our minds, and not to share our faith. And that's something that Paul was fearless about. And before we think that, he was, an apostle, and, I think we're going to need to contrast him with Peter, because Peter was, the rock, but we see examples in Peter's life. And this is after Peter's seen Jesus heal. He's living with Jesus. He's seen the power of Jesus and believes the power of Jesus, that he kind of gets pulled at different instances kind of into not being in a confrontational situation. He just denies Jesus 3 times. Not because he sincerely denied Jesus, just because he didn't want the confrontation. When he goes to Jerusalem and Antioch, just a second. When he goes to Jerusalem and Antioch, he has, he's meeting with the Jews and the Greek believers are separate. And instead of objecting to that, Peter just meets with the Jews and just hangs with the people he's comfortable with instead of, and Paul calls him out on that. And so point being, to support what you're saying, is that Paul was really, really remarkable in this regard, and such a powerful voice and such a powerful example for all of us. Jim.
There's a tenet, unfortunate tenet in legal issues, and it's today, and apparently was the same in Roman times, that you can buy as much justice as you can afford. and God expressly forbade that back in Exodus chapter 23. You shall not accept a bribe when you sit in judgment. I'm paraphrasing. And so Paul wouldn't, Felix gave him 2 years because it said he was hoping he would give him some money, and then he talked to him periodically over the next 2 years in hopes that he would give him some money. So that was quite a time to figure out.
I think he had 2 motivations there.
You're right. I think, he certainly had financial motivation there. I think the second thing is he knew that his time was limited, so he could just kick the can down the road, and because releasing Paul might.
Well, in other words, what I'm getting at is exactly what he's talking about. Paul did not violate God's precept about corruption and justice.
That's correct. That's correct. And Paul being Paul, and
with the people throughout the world and throughout that he had touched, he could probably have really had a plea go out and gotten.
But we can easily fall prey to that same temptation.
Yep. We do.
We will start in chapter 25 next week, and we're going to kind of replay with being in front of Roman authorities and hearing Jewish complaints. But anyway, thank you all for being here, and about 10 minutes we'll be back on.